Please welcome to the stage Axios Energy and Climate Editor Chuck McCutcheon.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Chuck McCutcheon. I'm Energy and Climate Editor at Axios. I edit the Future of Energy newsletter, which is free and lands in your email inboxes about this time every morning, gives you a complete roundup of the policy and industry and anything else that's going on in the energy world. Very excited to be with you here this morning to talk about one of the hot issues of the day, permitting reform, and what's next on Capitol Hill. If you're following along on live stream, be sure to use the hashtag AxiosLive. And so without further ado, please welcome our first guest, Representative from North Dakota, Congresswoman Julie Fedorchak. Nice to see you. So let's start with an easy one. Why is it so critical that permitting be addressed, especially in the context of AI and China?
Well, that's a great question. I think the fact that the audience is almost full and it's 8 o'clock in the morning on a cold day speaks to the importance of permitting reform. But really, when I look at the US and some of our challenges, China is a country of engineers and builders, and we've become a country of lawyers. And we have to flip that because we have unprecedented needs for power and other goods and services in our country. And we can't, we're almost paralyzed in our ability to build linear infrastructure in our country. And we need a lot of it to meet this demand. So that's why we're here.
All right. So you're only a freshman, but you've been able to notch a lot of accomplishments this year. And one of them was you created a working group of stakeholders dedicated to powering the future of AI. Can you sort of talk about that group and your work and sort of how it related to permitting?
Sure. So I come to this job as 12 years as a state utility regulator, most recent president of NARUC, the National Association of State Utility Regulators, and 8 years as a liaison for our state to the MISO region. So tons of experience with power. Also during that time realized how much more power we need because my state started seeing requests for more power gen for AI, and that became a big topic among state regulators across the country. And how are we going to meet this demand? So it was natural for my team to say, hey, you've got a unique skill set here. Why don't we start this working group to tackle this issue and try to provide some leadership on it, first by asking for information. So we did a request for information for folks, got 100 replies. And then we've taken that information and really kind of consolidated it around sort of three big issues. How do we stabilize our grid and stop the bleeding? Mm-hmm. How do we optimize what we've got? And then how do we grow?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You also got the House to pass your Cross-Border Energy Infrastructure Act. And it passed, but maybe you could sort of talk about the permitting aspect of it. I know that there were some concerns from Democrats that it would effectively exempt cross-border pipelines from environmental review. Is that a fair criticism?
It is not, no. All of the environmental review processes remain intact for that bill. It just streamlines who's in charge of them, right, and it takes the politics out of it. So Keystone XL was obviously the poster child for that bill, but it could also apply to transmission lines, to power lines going across the border if there was, some controversial one or one that, folks wanted to pull back on or try to prevent or block. So this tries to take that out of off the table and provide certainty, which I spent in my time as a state utility regulator. We permitted in my state, and it was right during the Bakken oil boom. So I was involved in permitting $13 billion worth of energy infrastructure. And the one message I heard loud and clear from industry was the need for certainty. And I tried to apply that, as my job as a regulator, just very fairly, like apply the law, keep it certain, don't throw any curveballs. And that's what industry needs, and that's what we need to bake into the law in some of the processes on the federal side.
Okay. You also recently introduced the FAIR Act, which would bar regional grid operators from charging consumers in states without clean energy policies for multi-state transmission lines that they build to satisfy another state's climate or renewable goals. Can you sort of talk about the impetus behind that?
Sure. Again, coming from my experience as a state liaison to MISO for 8 years, MISO is one of the biggest grid operators, runs the grid in the central part of the country from North Dakota to Texas, 15-state region, 32 million customers. They're in a massive build-out of transmission power lines, which we all know are needed. But the driver of those lines is important, and who pays for them is even more important. And how you do that matters, because it sends signals down the road for how future lines get built. There's a lot of different drivers for the need for power lines, and they get baked into rates, and utilities earn money on them. And so there is a vested interest to try to build, because it does help you increase your rate base and make more earnings. So you need to balance that all out. And this bill is an attempt to say, like, when it comes to cost allocation, which is not permitting reform, I do not view them in the same bucket, but it gets mixed into permitting reform, because cost allocation helps smooth over the building of transmission. Is probably the biggest thing besides NEPA and Clean Water Act issues. So it does get looped in, and I wanted to have sort of a Republican take on cost allocation in the mix and in the discussion, so that we could look at it from that standpoint. How the biggest thing in the energy sector, I think, is sending the right signals, and those drive investment decisions. They also drive costs and affordability, and those are all big issues. And this is an attempt to say, like, what are the cost causers? And if you're causing the need for a line, then you should pay for it, and that's what the FAIR Act does.
Okay. So let's talk about what's going on the Hill. Well, first of all, let me ask you, what do you see as the legislative path for that? Do you think that bill could be part of a package, or
Sure.
Do you know yet?
I see it as part of sort of the House's approach to permitting reform more broadly, as we talked. I'd love to see that pass. You know, the House is taking more of a menu option, not one big bill. So we've got the Permit Act, we've got speed, we've got a bunch of different smaller bills. I see this as part of that. I'd love to get it through E&C and then passed by the full House and then over to the Senate, so that the Senate could use it in its negotiations of a broader, you've got some senators coming up later, so I'm sure they'll talk about their strategy but if it's anything from, if the pass is any indication, they'll probably consolidate things into a bigger package.
Right.
And this could be part of the negotiations for that.
Okay. Well, yeah, turning to what's going on the Hill right now as far as permitting, can you talk about your committee, Energy and Commerce, the Energy Subcommittee, is doing a markup of several bills tomorrow. You're a co-sponsor on one of them, which is the New Source Review Bill, which seeks to kind of revamp EPA's gauge for deciding whether an expansion or an upgrade or to a refinery or some other type of industrial operation would warrant pre-construction permitting under the New Source Review program.
So New Source Review is an issue that has really blocked some good decisions. So like if you've got a power plant, it's a natural gas plant or maybe a coal facility, you want to convert it to power, gas. The New Source Review could prevent you from doing that and creating more efficiencies in existing infrastructure. And so like I said, one of the most obvious things we need to do quickly is maximize our existing resources, get the most out of them that we possibly can. New Source Review can prohibit that because it can trigger new environmental impact reviews for upgrading those facilities and higher standards. And that's not what you want to be doing if you're trying to maximize your existing infrastructure. So I think we need to reform that and take away that disincentive.
Okay. And then separately, you've got transportation infrastructure is taking up its own clean water permitting bill. And then next week, you're supposed to have the House take up the SPEED Act from Natural Resources. Do you want to say anything about those two bills?
Sure. Well, when you look at permitting reform, I'm sure all of you agree, there's NEPA, there's the Clean Water Act. Those are the two big buckets of environmental review processes that they hinder development of every resource, whether it's wind, whether it's solar, pipelines, power lines, they're all impacted by those. So streamlining those processes, creating more certainty, limiting timelines, addressing the judicial reform or review processes, all of those are baked into those acts and these bills, and take significant strides forward. I saw it in some big projects in my state. NEPA can be a big challenge for folks, and the processes can drag out for years. I was one of the 2 people in my state that approved the Dakota Access Pipeline in North Dakota. That was in 2016. That's still in court. And a lot of that was NEPA related. Permits were vacated and then brought back, and it's like, it's like, you really couldn't write it more crazy than what's happened with that one. So this provides, again, more certainty there, better timelines, more clarity. And I think most importantly, no matter what your favorite type of resource is, this applies to everything. And I think that's why it has bipartisan support. And I think I'm hopeful that we can get that one done, both the SPEED Act in particular, and then Permit Act as well.
Yeah, well, that leads to my next question, which is sort of the bottom line, is how difficult do you think it's going to be to, get these House bills that are moving, the Senate's working on its own bills that we'll discuss later, combine them all into a package, and get something to the president's desk in an election year?
Well, it certainly has a lot of challenges, but I'm a freshman and I'm optimistic. So I also didn't think the government was going to shut down, and we ended up having the record shut down. So that gives you an idea of my naivete. I think, though, I sense that there's a significant understanding amongst both Democrats and Republicans that the need right now is pretty serious. We have to get this done. We really need new power resources. We really need to expand our grid. We have the record demand, and even if we were to build as fast as we ever have in the past, it's far too slow for what we're facing. So we have to get this stuff done. And I sense that there's more of a willingness and interest in moving things forward this time. So I hope that I'm right. I hope that the Senate, it all kind of comes down to the Senate and them being able to get their, their various folks aligned. So the goal from the House is give them as many options as possible. I'm pretty confident we'll get things done on the House side. And then hopefully they'll have enough in that menu to be able to pull together a meaningful package.
Yeah. Okay. Just wanted to ask you one last thing, and it's not directly related to permitting, but you talked about your experience on North Dakota's Public Service Commission, and can you sort of talk about some of the current unease that's among state utility regulators? We just reported that they're asking FERC now to convene a conference next month to hash out its plans to take control of data centers and interconnection to power grids.
Yeah, this is an issue. I mean, the whole balance between state and federal rights as it relates to all of these energy issues is significant. It's, as a state regulators, I understand you kind of hold your power and your authority tight, and you want to maintain that. And so I think it's part of the broader discussion that we all need to have over those rights and the need. When is it appropriate for the federal government to step in from a national security issue or reliability issues, and take action and provide sort of higher authority? And I think it's fair for the states to be asking that of FERC. I also think it's really important that that we have this conversation and come to an agreement on when that is appropriate for the feds. And it also gets to the issue of reliability. Whose responsibility is reliability? The states have a big role to play, but our grid is interoperated it doesn't recognize state boundaries.
Right.
And so state actions affect the reliability of the whole thing. So I think that there's, broader oversight there that also needs to be considered. And all of this is part of that discussion, which we need to have quickly.
Well, speaking of quickly, we're out of time, so we'll have to leave it there. So thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Chuck. Appreciate it. Thanks all.
$1.5 trillion is parked on the sidelines. Projects that would help create good-paying American jobs are stuck in years of burdensome reviews. Permitting reform would unlock over 650 major U.S. infrastructure projects, from new roads and bridges to bringing more energy online. With faster, more efficient permitting, we can unleash America's economic potential. Let's move from waiting to building. Ready, set, let's build.
Put your hands together for our View from the Top moderator, Axios Live Executive Vice President, Kristen Burkhalter.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us early for one of our last events of the year with Axios Live. I am so thankful to the Business Roundtable for bringing this really important event to life. And I also now get to have the pleasure of having a conversation with the chairman and CEO of Bechtel, who's also the chair of the BRT Smart Regulation Committee. Welcome to Axios, Brendan Bechtel. Hi. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Ooh, hopefully you guys are warming up because it's a little chilly backstage. All right, Brendan, we're going to jump straight in.
Please.
You have called permitting reform the single biggest thing policymakers can do to unlock economic opportunity in America. Tell us why.
Yeah, so I believe so deeply in this because I'm looking at it through two lenses. So I'm looking at it through my role as chair of the Business Roundtable Smart Regulation Committee, where in that capacity, I'm here representing the many members of BRT and all the different sectors of infrastructure that require permit reform. Secondly, I'm also the chair and CEO of Bechtel, which is one of the largest engineering, construction, and project management companies in the US. We build the infrastructure that powers and moves our economy. So energy, power, telecommunications, data centers, everything connected to artificial intelligence. Permitting is now the critical path for most of the projects that we build. Because we build such large, complex projects, it usually takes longer to get the permits for our projects than it does to actually build them. The delays that developers experience when they're putting these projects together add cost. And today, the US is one of the most expensive places to develop infrastructure. McKinsey just released a study in July. It takes about 4 to 5 years on average for a dollar that wants to flow into infrastructure in the US and has to go through the federal permitting process to actually get into the economy because of the permit process. That means there's between 1.1 and 1.5 trillion, with a T, dollars stuck in the federal permitting process. That equates to about $1.7 trillion, $2.4 trillion in unrealized GDP impact. The good news is that the president and members of Congress have realized how urgent this is. President Trump has just recently made this a huge priority, particularly for key infrastructure around energy and artificial intelligence. But as someone who's in the business of developing and delivering projects for others, uncertainty kills investment, especially for really big projects. If we want to unleash jobs and the economy and growth, then we really need bipartisan leadership from Congress in addition to the executive actions that the president and the administration are putting out, because we need these permit reforms codified and durable across administrations. The final point I want to make to open here, Kristen, is that we can do this without cutting corners. And that's a really important part of the BRT's platform on permit reform. We need both speed and stewardship, but above all else, we need these reforms to be predictable, consistent, and efficient.
Thank you for those facts. Shocking. I learned something. So as chair of the BRT Smart Regulation Committee, drill down, what specific reforms need to happen now? What matters to you at Bechtel? What matters to your roundtable members?
Sure. Yeah, so we think that at BRT and Bechtel, there's sort of 4 key reforms that need to happen. So I'll say them quickly and then I'll go through each in a little more detail. So we need to eliminate redundancy in the process. We need to enforce deadlines. We need to modernize the process, and we need to reform litigation. So just a bit more on each of those, Kristen. Under eliminate redundancy, we are often studying the same environmental impacts 3, 4, 5 different times across different agencies when a project goes through the permit process. That's not thorough, that's wasteful. And in addition, every one of these big projects that goes through the federal permitting process also has to go through a state process. And the state process generates a ton of very useful, reliable scientific data. Why can't we just use that same data in the federal process? Under deadlines, right now there's no real consequence if an agency doesn't achieve the deadlines that have been set through things like the Fiscal Responsibility Act or FAST 41. The solution, we think, is that the agency gets 90 days after the environmental impact statement or the environmental impact assessment is complete. They get 90 days to decide, and if they don't decide, it's a yes. That will create pressure to actually get to a decision. That'll drive accountability. We also think it's reasonable and achievable. I'll talk maybe later about some examples. Under the process and how not modern it is, we're using a 1970s permitting playbook for 21st century infrastructure right now. We have categorical exclusions, we have programmatic reviews for a reason, but we're not using them nearly as effectively as we could. If we want to win, we need speed as a nation. Our competitor nations aren't waiting. We're ceding the ground right now. And then this is maybe the most difficult, but it's one of the ones I'm most passionate about because the data is so alarming, but reforming litigation is going to be so important, and it's going to be really hard. But here's some statistics. So 28% of major projects that go through the federal permitting process get litigated. It's about 2/3 of all solar projects, half of all pipelines, as an example. It's always the really big, complicated ones that get litigated. Of those 28% that get litigated, 89% cite NEPA violations. So that tells you a lot of this hangs on the treatment of NEPA legislation. Of those 28% that get litigated, in 80% of the cases, the agency's issuance of the permit still stands at the end of, on average, a 4.2-year delay. So about 30% of all projects are being delayed for 4.2 years when 4/5 of them are not getting changed in any way, shape, or form. That's just really unnecessary abuse of the legal system and the existing policies that's costing communities, it's costing jobs, it's costing the taxpayers if it's public money. We will never achieve energy dominance if we're litigating our way out of our energy future. And courts just, in my view, shouldn't be able to kill a great project because of sort of legislative wrangling that in the end is not going to prevail anyways. Right now you have 6 years to file a lawsuit after a project's received its permit. It should be 150 days.
Yeah. Okay, you mentioned dominance, AI.
Yeah. Yes.
Let's go there for a second,
Please.
And I do want to get to those examples.
Yeah.
But we can't have a conversation without bringing in AI and the infrastructure and the energy that's needed to power this.
Yeah.
In your opinion, is this permitting reform the linchpin to ensure America wins the AI race?
Yes, obviously, it has to be. The good news is that this administration has already realized that, and they're doing everything that they can through executive action to help speed that process up. But and we design and build these AI data centers, which are not your typical data centers. They're much more complex, which is why we do it in a very highly integrated way, all the way from the permit process through to commissioning the plant. But we don't get to start any of that until a permit's issued. So yes, absolutely. If we want to win the AI race as a nation, then the front end of that, the critical path, is going to be the permit process.
Okay, let's get to some of those examples.
Yeah.
Let's start with the bad.
Yeah.
Give me an example of where permitting reform really has been a challenge.
Yeah, so this one's a little close to my heart, but the example I'll use is a liquefied natural gas facility in Texas. The customer, our customer, the developer, NextDecade, spent 10 years getting their permits for this project. From an economic impact perspective, this was the largest financing package ever in the US for a greenfield energy facility. There were over 70 purchase orders placed in the economy before the project even got started. At peak, we'll have 5,000 construction workers on the project, 35% of whom will come from the local community, just like massive, massive economic opportunity. So we broke ground on the project in October of 2023. A lawsuit was filed. After about $1 billion of the customer's money had been spent, we had probably 2,000 people getting paychecks already at site. We're a year into the project. The DC Court of Appeals revoked the FERC permit in 2024. Totally unprecedented, sent a shockwave through the energy industry. When is a permit really a permit? After 8 months of delay and uncertainty, the court fortunately finally gave some kind of indication that FERC, you have to go back through and re-examine some minor changes that have been made to the design, but it created all this uncertainty hanging over the project. Fortunately, now, over a year later in the summer, FERC approved, again, the permit. So again, disruption, uncertainty, delays, nothing changed as a consequence of this. It's now one of the 4 LNG projects we're building on the Gulf Coast. But the court reversals like this are whiplash. And if you're making a $10 to $20 billion investment in a local economy, and this can happen after you've already spent $1 billion and you already have all your final permits, why would you make those decisions going forward?
Such loss. Bechtel is a global company. You mentioned Backstage. You're building all over the world. Let's end on a high note.
Yeah.
Give me an example of something that is working well, a shining example.
Yeah, so I think that the kind of permit reforms that we've seen happen in places like Canada and Australia and the EU, I think are really interesting because it's an example of the opportunity we have, but we have to seize it. So all of those jurisdictions have basically set a deadline of thou shalt get your permit within 3 years or not. The example I love is a project we worked on in Australia, the Western Sydney Airport. It's the first greenfield airport built in Australia in 35 years. Total permitting time from site designation to final approval, including public comment period, subsequent review and revision, was 2.5 years. So the government picked the site. From the time they picked the site, whole comment process, all the revisions that needed to be made to final approval so that we could start moving dirt was 2.5 years. We just completed that project 7 months ahead of schedule. The airport will open the next year. It's an amazing example of, I think, a new standard and precedent for how quickly you can do this process and how quickly you can deliver it.
All right, thank you for ending on a high note.
Yeah.
Definitely some things that need to be sorted out. Thank you, Brendan, for joining Axios. Thank you, BRT, for making this event possible. And stick around. We have a couple more conversations. Talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's great.
Please welcome to the stage Axios business reporter Nathan Bomey.
I'm Nathan Bomey. I'm a business reporter and author of Axios Closer, a daily newsletter on all things business. Let's get into our next conversation. Please welcome to the stage Senator Brian Schatz. Thanks for being here.
Nice to see you.
You think someone failed to file a permit to turn the heat up in here? Is that? In the Democratic Party, there's always been tension between protecting the environment and energy. So when you think about permitting reform, how do you balance those two priorities?
It's a planetary emergency, so I think the environmental movement over time, look, I got my start in the environmental movement stopping bad projects, save Sandy Beach, save Sunset Beach, and then there was finally a bumper sticker that just said, save something. That was how I made my bones in politics and in the environmental movement. But because this is a planetary emergency, we've got to reconfigure our thinking to the scale of the problem. We need to build big things rather than just be fixated on stopping bad things. Now, the National Environmental Policy Act and other federal and state statutes are important, but to the extent that they're an impediment towards us making our clean energy goals a reality, I think they need to be addressed. So I'm pretty hawkish on permitting reform generally, and I have had some very difficult conversations with my friends on the left about the urgency of the moment. And so we're looking forward to the discussion between the House and the Senate.
Well, that gets to a broader discussion, I think, that's been taking place in the Democratic Party between this idea of abundance versus maybe the billionaire class, and where do you sit on that?
I don't, look, that's like a salon. We got to pass a bill. And in order to pass permitting reform, we're going to need to address, and I've been listening to the conversations, the previous two conversations, there is effectively a ban on solar energy projects. 90% of the projects in the queue are solar. Most of, whatever you think about the climate crisis, wherever you are on the political spectrum, the vast majority of the electricity that is available to get online is solar energy. And anything with a federal nexus, not just on federal land, but where there is a federal nexus, is effectively banned. And so it's nice to kind of configure a statute for a world in which Donald Trump's agencies aren't doing violence to solar and wind projects. The CEO of Bechtel was here saying really compelling things about when the government makes a decision, it has to stick. But there's a national solar ban right now. And so in order to get permitting reform, we need to have some confidence that we're not going to make the world safe for the American Petroleum Institute and not for all these solar projects. And again, I have an abiding interest in solving the planetary crisis, but even if you don't care about that, even if the only thing you care about is the price of an electron, this solar ban is creating an electron shortage across the country, and that's before the ramp up of data centers and an increased load. So we've really got to address this national solar ban before we get into kind of configuring NEPA in a way that makes perfect sense, because the administration has tons and tons of tools to not just revoke permits, which they've done, but also to sandbag permits to the point where time being money, float being not endless, a lot of projects are dying on the vine right now and creating an energy shortage.
So you're not concerned that if permitting reform happens, that it'll end up just speeding fossil fuel projects and sidelining renewables?
I mean, I have that worry. I looked at the SPEED Act, and I want to be fair here. I think there is a good faith effort to try to effectuate permitting reform. But, and I'm not my friend Sheldon Whitehouse's spokesperson or my friend Martin Heinrich's spokesperson, but the two things that I've heard them talk about is A, we got to lift the ban. We got to lift the ban on solar energy and wind energy. And B, there's like nothing on transmission in the SPEED Act, right? And I would say also, if you look at the underlying statutory language in the SPEED Act, right? Everyone wants to pass permitting reform, and this is something I learned when I was a kid at the Hawaii legislature. Sometimes you get so attached to the bill that you forget why the bill is important, and by the end of the legislative session, you're just trying to pass something called the original thing. We have to remember that permitting reform is for the purpose of getting more electricity online for the construction, the transmission, and distribution of electrons. And so the SPEED Act does some important things, but it also leaves out the sort of elephant in the room: transmission and the national solar ban. And then underlying that, it's not really NEPA reform. It's a pretty big loophole where any state or tribal agency can do their environmental review and then obviate the need for a federal review. Now, do I think that after you've completed your review, that decision by the federal government must stick? Yes. Do I think that any developer of fossil or clean or anything else, housing, deserves an expeditious decision by its government? Yes. Now that's NEPA reform, that's permitting reform. But just allowing NEPA to be waived if a state agency says, we took a look at it, I don't think that's, even if we did transmission, I think there are a lot of people who would have some deep reservations about that.
So transmission lines has got to be one of the wonkiest things, but it's one of those things where, you know, everyone says, yeah, we need more transmission lines. But then when one pops up in their backyard, they get really upset. How do you confront sort of that NIMBY attitude there?
Look, we have to decide this is a national priority. We have to decide we're going to be a country here. We're not going to be 50 individual sovereigns deciding how we're going to run our electricity grid. And I think it's hard. But I think the same problem exists for housing as exists for our electricity transmission and distribution system. We have to decide that there are a couple of things that are important enough that we're gonna distribute the cost among everybody. Everybody is for housing except for in their neighborhood. Everybody is for clean energy except if they can see it. And that's not going to work. If we're going to have a prosperous society that has abundant electrons, we're going to actually have to see the construction of those things. They're not going to all be somewhere else.
Obviously, one of the big users of energy in this sort of energy boom you're talking about is going to be AI data centers. And we're seeing maybe some increasing pushback on data centers throughout the country. How do you feel about this rollout? Does Congress need to step in and do anything?
I'm not sure that Congress needs to step in on the specific question of data centers, and I do think public service commissions, public utility commissions are sort of deciding on a state-by-state and agency-by-agency level. Some of them are asking that whatever increment of new electricity, of new load that is being added to the grid is clean. That sounds good unless all they're doing is crowding out. If they're just capturing projects that were already going to happen, that were wind, and then the rest of the grid is on coal and LNG, that's not really a change in the energy mix. So I think these are tough issues. But I think the main thing we can do is an actually comprehensive permitting reform. And in Sheldon Whitehouse and Martin Heinrich, you have two sort of unreconstructed climate hawks who are also pretty hawkish on permitting reform. So I'm generally bullish on this as long as the House realizes that in order to enact a law, you don't just need an agreement between the interest groups, you need an agreement between the parties and the chambers.
Well, I ask because, in some states, I think in Oregon, for example, right now, there's a project that's causing some consternation locally because there's at least a perception that it could affect water quality. Now, that's an issue that would be reviewed by environmental reviewers of course, through our process. So is there a concern that some of those issues could be ignored if we speed things up too fast?
I mean, yes, the answer is yes, but I also just want to be very clear. I think that we're underestimating the overlap between Republicans and Democrats and between clean energy advocates and those who want a more traditional fuel and electricity mix, because I think everybody is understanding that when the government makes a decision, when the government gives someone permission to move forward, that really has to stick. And to me, the trade is someone who cares deeply about not just climate, but ecosystems and the rest of it, recreation and all the rest of it, is the trade societally should be, we're going to have these strict environmental standards, but if you get through them, you're in, right? And I think the challenge for, as the Bechtel CEO was talking about, is an LNG project where not the permits were revoked, but people had multiple bites at the apple in terms of litigation and sort of hanging up a project. That's a legitimate concern. For me, all of this solar, where Doug Burgum and other executive agencies are basically scouring any project with even a kind of ancillary federal nexus and killing it, right? That's also not okay. And so that's where we have to be, is to say when the government makes a choice, especially after environmental review, that review is final. And I think right now, it's a little weird to me that we're here talking about permitting reform and talking about the amount of money and investment and opportunity that will be unlocked, but we are in the middle of a national solar ban instituted by an executive order by the President of the United States. So I'm really hawkish on this in the sense that I did the investment tax credit and the production tax credit in exchange for lifting the oil export ban. I was very involved in the IRA and Joe Manchin's demand for the Mountain Valley Pipeline, which was not a delightful conversation with my environmental friends. And so I am willing to do the hard stuff, but it is really hard to have a negotiation if in the middle of all of it, not all of it, but almost all of the projects that are online that are ready to deliver electrons, mostly cheaper than what is currently being paid for, is being canceled for ideological reasons.
And how much of that is affecting your home state?
The cancellations are not, because there are very few federal nexus in the state of Hawaii, it's really the loss of the IRA credits that are going to hit our consumers.
Big buzzword in this town right now is affordability. How much of this conversation really just needs to center around that?
I mean, I think that's the whole thing. And, because I live in Hawaii and because I represent Hawaii and because everything except health insurance is more expensive in Hawaii, that's what I wake up thinking about every day. And I think inflation and affordability are sort of overlapping concepts, but not exactly the same. I think some people can afford their lives even if inflation is at, X number, and some people feel like they still can't make it even if inflation nominally is better. And so I think thinking about the pain points for individuals, home insurance is spiking, electricity is about double the rate of inflation, food and groceries, some things are cheaper, most things are not. Electronics, as we start to buy our Christmas presents, like everything is up. And I think people want to see us actually working on that.
All right, well, at Axios, we do often like to end our conversations with one fun thing. You went to school at the same school that Barack Obama went to years earlier. Tell us about, do you have any favorite teachers in common?
Oh, I don't know if we have any teachers in common. His buddy, who he played ball with, was an elementary school teacher of my kids growing up. So, and we were 10 years apart, so I would periodically text the president's sister when the president was in town and say, like, hey, if he needs a 10th for a basketball game or whatever. I didn't get any return phone calls.
No, wait, you're also a body surfer, as I understand it, or have done some body surfing in the past.
It's my favorite activity.
Were you doing that instead of studying?
Yes.
Excellent. Brian Strauss, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Please welcome to the stage Axios energy and climate editor Chuck McCutcheon.
Oh, it is warmer out here. Thanks again for sticking around. I just want to welcome our final guest this morning. He's a long time leader on these issues, Colorado Senator John Hickenlooper. So you and I backstage were just talking about how things are different this year than last year when you had Senator Manchin, and obviously the dynamics are a little bit different as well. What are can you just talk about the pluses and minuses of how this is a different situation now in terms of getting something done on permitting?
Well, certainly part of the opportunity here is that Joe Manchin and John Barrasso worked so hard on their permitting reform bill that what we've got to do now is just get up over the hill. Not that that's going to be any easier, just for all the reasons you all have been discussing this morning. But Joe Manchin talked to a lot of people all the time about a lot of different aspects of permit reform. So he, in many ways, educated not just the Senate, but the Congress to a certain extent, and also the American people. And I think a lot of what Senator Schatz was talking about in that previous session, or our previous test, is now within reach, where people do see that this is an alignment of self-interest. And whether you're talking about politics or business, when you get people's self-interest aligned, then good things happen.
Okay. Let's talk about the bill that you've sponsored with Senator Curtis, the Co-Location Energy Act. It would authorize renewable developers to evaluate and, with leaseholders' consent, build clean energy projects on existing lease areas. Can you sort of elaborate on that, particularly the importance of that leaseholder consent issue?
Well, I think that, and this is a bill we've got with Senator Curtis.
Right.
And we wanted to make sure that we protected individuals' rights, but that once the process has been engaged, and once someone's gone through, or a group of people or any entity has gone through the appropriate processes and has the ability to use that public land for, let's say, an oil pipeline or some other fossil-related endeavor, that public land, therefore, if without impeding the previous use, they can use it for wind or solar, it shouldn't be denied. And I think, again, broad-scale support both in the Senate, but I think also with the American public.
Yeah. Your bill also would kind of expedite the permitting process by, kind of assessing if wind and solar could qualify for a categorical exclusion under NEPA. I'm assuming everyone here knows what a categorical exclusion is, but can you sort of talk about why you thought that was important to include?
Sure. And I think what we're trying to get to, and this is, I think each discussion of permit reform brings this more to the surface. We've got to get to all of the above. And as Senator Schatz was saying, whether it's fossil related or whether it's renewable, we've got two real directives from the American people. Cost matters. We've got to make sure that we get that electricity at the lowest possible cost. And we want it as clean as possible. And I think everyone shares that. You talk to the chairman and CEO of Exxon about these issues, which I've done.
Right.
And he understands it's a constant effort to get cleaner energy. Pretty much everybody in the energy industry, I'm an old geologist, pretty much everyone in the energy industry started out as an environmentalist. Not everybody, but an awful lot of them did. And they want to see that nexus between lowering cost, but at the same time moving towards a cleaner energy future.
Yeah. Being a geologist, as you mentioned, and coming from a state like you do, you obviously had a long time interest in mining and critical minerals. And you've talked in the past about achieving, quote, an alignment of self-interest when it comes to approving mining projects in particular. Can you sort of talk about how the Democratic Party has kind of evolved on this issue of looking at, the need for dealing with mining and critical minerals?
Yes, and let me just start by saying that as a party, we have always, zealously protected the environment. And within permitting reform, I think what we're talking about is not in any way diminishing or diluting the environmental protections that we have in place. What we're suggesting is that we can look at those risks and assess them, make sure that there's full transparency that the public can see everything that's going on. But once we go through that process, an appropriate process, then we've got to go forward. And we've got to make sure that whether it's wind and solar or it's a natural gas pipeline, once it's been approved, we want to make sure it can get built.
Okay. During last year's permitting discussions, you were a big champion of two bills. One was big wires and the other was the Speed and Reliability Act as part of a permitting package. My understanding is that you're no longer doing those minimum transfer requirements in the Speed Act, but you're still pursuing, or in the big wires, but you're still pursuing provisions in speed and reliability. Can you sort of talk about that?
Yeah, and again, you're getting into the details, but sometimes the details where it really matters. The focus, again, gets back to that focus is how can we get electricity where it needs to be at the lowest possible cost, and make sure that as we're doing that, we are rewarding the investment, but at the same time protecting the public right to know. And the same thing with the mining issues. We're in that unusual place right now where there is a large section of public opinion that recognizes that we have a unique alignment of self-interest, right? If you care about the climate crisis or the issues around climate change, you almost by necessity have to recognize that these little things matter and that we've got to follow through on the details to get the lowest possible costs. And in many ways, that means we've got to move more quickly. So if you've always resisted any big construction project, we need more copper, more nickel, more cobalt, more rare earth minerals. We need all these things to address climate. If you believe that climate change is a real risk, that's a serious issue. So we need to recognize that from that perspective, suddenly you have an alignment of self-interest that they say, well, I've always fought a mining project, whether it's the United States or anywhere else in the world. Now we have to be very thoughtful when we say we're going to oppose a project, because we realize we cannot address climate change without more of some of these metals and minerals.
Okay. So on permitting reform, just bottom line, I'm sure everybody here is very curious to know. I mean, how optimistic or pessimistic are you about getting something passed, getting it conferenced, getting it to the president's desk in an election year?
Well, I'm I used to refer to myself as an entrepreneur on loan to public service. As an entrepreneur, I have to be optimistic. It's in the nature of the job, but I'm also a realist and a pragmatist, and I recognize that this is a pretty steep hill, and that a lot of people before me have died on this hill. I think we'll get it done. I think we'll probably get it done in the first quarter, maybe even sooner than that, just because there is this unique alignment of self-interest that where I think many in the environmental community, they may not be happy with everything, and we're still negotiating in the permit, trying to, as we reform permitting, what does that finally look like? But I think that we're getting closer. And again, what Joe Manchin and all the people, and I was one of those people over the last couple of years that helped create and push that boulder up the hill. We've still got a ways to go, but it's a lot further up than it was, let's say, 2 years ago.
Yeah, you talk backstage about the coordination that's going on, particularly with Senator Whitehouse, who's the ranking Democrat on Environment and Public Works, and your committee, Energy and Natural Resources. Can you sort of talk about that a little bit?
Sure, and I think this is going on with the Republican chairs of those committees. Sheldon Whitehouse on the Environment and Public Works is the ranking member, so he's a top Democrat. Martin Heinrich on my committee, Energy and Natural Resources. Everyone's meeting on a regular basis, the Republicans and the Democrats. Now, I'm not saying that they have consensus, and there's still things that are being worked out, but let me say this, in the United States Senate, I can find many more examples where the Republicans and Democrats are not talking about something that really matters. And this really matters, and I'm optimistic because the Republicans and the Democrats are having, not just talking to each other, but are making suggestions, listening to each other, responding. There's an attitude towards neither side's going to get everything they want. And usually when people broaden their sense of what a victory looks like, they broaden their self-interest, that in a broader array of outcomes, they get something better. That's when you get transactions. That's when you get progress.
Yeah. Separately from legislation, I mentioned you recently joined some of your colleagues, Democratic colleagues, asking for answers from Secretary Burgum on the Interior Department's recent order requiring his personal approval for routine solar and wind permitting decisions. What was your impetus behind that, and have you gotten any response?
Yes, and I like and admire, I think of him as Governor Burgum, but Secretary Burgum. I've known him, his first 4 years as governor, my last 4 years as governor of Colorado. And what we hear, and it's just not from citizens, but it's from some of our rural electrical co-ops that really depend on some of the opportunities in the Inflation Reduction Act, and they're now disappearing. And it feels like to them, and to a lot of people that are reaching out to our office, that Secretary Burgum is scouring every application for the smallest thing that they can use as an excuse to stop the project in its tracks. These things that have gone through, at least to our eyes, all the right steps, and they've gotten approvals in the right way, and these are projects that would actually bring less expensive, cleaner energy to the American people at a time when, again, you already talked about how the landscape is changing, how AI puts, there's these storm clouds on the horizon that they're going to dramatically increase the cost of energy, and yet these are the projects that are in the hopper right now, especially these wind and solar projects. They're the only real solution short term, and by that I mean in the next 5 years, that we're going to get. We kill the wind, we kill the solar. It takes 5 years for GE to get a turbine going. We're condemning ourselves to seeing, you talk about inflation, we're going to double the rate of inflation in terms of utility costs this year, almost certainly, and it could get worse in the following years. And that's going to create, as Senator Schatz pointed out, for a lot of people, they're just trying to pay their utility bill and get their rent paid at the end of the month. And doubling the rate of inflation or quadrupling the rate of inflation is not acceptable.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, we're out of time, so we'll have to leave it at that. Thanks again for joining Axios. And thank you all for coming out this morning. We'll continue to cover these issues via the Future of Energy newsletter, and we hope to see you at future events, and we hope you have a happy holiday season. Thanks. Thank you.